Welcome to Lemoore City Council Chambers located at 429 C Street. This is the November 7th meeting. Please silence all electronic devices as a courtesy to those in attendance. Thank you. If you could please stand for the invocation by Minister Kimberly Nelson from Lifeway Church and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilmember Bornick.
Father God, we come before you, Lord, and we thank you, Lord God, that we have you to turn to in times of trouble. We have you to turn to, Lord God, when things are going good. Father God, we ask you to bless this council time. Father God, this meeting, we ask that you would bless our Madam Mayor and all the city council leaders, Lord God, and everybody in the community. We ask you, Father God, that you would bestow wisdom upon everybody sitting in front of me, Lord God, and those sitting behind me. I ask you, Lord God, to bring comfort and protection in our community for those that are hurting and for those that need help. And Lord God, we ask that you would move our city leaders and you would move those that live within the city, Lord, this community, Father God, to go hand in hand and help everybody. And I ask for your love to surround every person here. And Lord, I ask you to take care of our country and our world with all the things going on in the world. We ask for your protection over your creation. In Jesus' name, amen.
Please join me on the salute to the United States of America. Salute. I
pledge
pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Councilmember Garza.
Here.
Councilmember Lyons.
Here.
Councilmember Orth.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gornick.
Here.
And Mayor Matthews.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda approval, additions and or deletion.
There are none.
We'll go ahead and move on to the study session 1-1, polling and public engagement services. Mr. Wilson.
So good evening, Mayor and council members. Back in 2020, the city went out after a sales tax initiative that failed on the ballot with about 47% yes votes from our residents. At the time, we knew we were short. So since then, we went out and passed some ordinances that allowed us to get into cannabis as another way to raise money for the city. We originally had inked about $3 million worth of cannabis contracts for the city of Lemoore to help relieve the stress to the general fund and the revenues. Unfortunately, of that $3 million, we're only seeing about $750,000 a year annually right now. The rest never came to fruition. And then we went through COVID hit, and then during COVID, we were getting some ARPA funds from the government. So that was the equivalent of kind of a sales tax to kind of carry us through for a couple of years. But when we were developing the budgets for this year, we realized that we're still having some more issues. We tried to, ECDEV our way out of the hole, continuing to work at that. But I did come to council previously and ask for permission to go out and start seeking alternate revenue sources. So tonight we're going to have two companies that assist in polling cities, so we can kind of get an idea of what revenue raising ideas our residents may be more inclined to vote for and at what rates and things like that. So tonight we have Jean Bregman from Jean Bregman and Associates. She's a polling company that's going to just kind of give a quick overview and can take questions that council may have. And then Rochelle Lewis from NBS, and they kind of help consult through the whole process to get us to ballot and get us going. So without further ado, I will introduce right now Rochelle Lewis from NBS. They're both online, and I'll turn it over to Michelle. Are you there, Rochelle?
Hi there. I need you to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Matthews, City Council members, and City Manager Olson. I think that Jean is I'm not sure that we have Jean with us yet. I know he was trying to update his Zoom app just as you were starting. So I expect him to be here any moment. But I'm happy to get started. I know you have just a few slides that we prepared for you. So Nathan, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Just a little bit about both of our firms, and we've partnered together in the past. NBS, just by my introduction, at Rochelle Lewis, I'm a senior engagement consultant with NBS. Our firm was founded more than 25 years ago. We have supported hundreds of cities and counties, school districts, special districts, as well as nonprofits, with a variety of revenue funding tools. That includes revenue generation, such as sales tax measures, special assessments, and parcel taxes and other property-related charges. And Civic Mike, the public engagement division of NBS, specializes in working with public servants to inform their communities of the challenges that local governments face, and to engage key stakeholders and bring them citizen voices into the decision-making process, and to show the residents the transparent practices of their elected officials. In short, we know how to communicate with voters on tax-related measures in a way that is meaningful for them, and to solicit feedback from them that's meaningful to you. We have established a track record of working collaboratively with community members, as well as elected leaders, labor leaders, and business leaders, to help build consensus around the challenges that you face. So in addition to doing the outreach, we also do financial advising, and we also help cities actually administer measures as well. We've worked with hundreds of public agencies and raised, just over in 23-24 fiscal year, over $1 billion for various agencies throughout the state and outside of California as well. And I don't know if we have Gene with us yet. I don't hear him. Okay, I'm sorry. I see he just sent me a note. For some reason, he's having difficulty getting in. But a little bit about Gene's firm. He's been around for more than 3 decades. We enjoy working with him on partnering with the public opinion research side of the equation, because he has done virtually every type of research for every type of municipality. And he also has a lot of good experience working for not just large cities, but smaller cities that are in more rural areas, and that we feel is very valuable. And he has a very successful track record developing local funding measures, and so we're pleased to be partnering with him on this project. So if you want to switch to the next slide. These are the basic elements of what the survey would include, to understand some general environment around what your residents feel about the city, what they think the priorities are for the city to address in a statistically reliable way. And we know that you hear from people, you are in touch with your community, but sometimes the folks who are the most involved in the community don't always represent the voters at large. So this is a valuable endeavor to undertake this research. So you're getting quantitatively reliable research here. We'll also work with your staff to understand what the potential measures are that could meet your needs. NBS can do revenue modeling to understand what different types of measures, including a sales tax, which I know you have already been thinking about in particular, would bring. And I know you've done some research on that, but there may be other measures to also research and take a look at, see what options are. We would help, the polling would help us understand what are the most important reasons for residents to support a measure, and to also understand their priorities with regard to services and programs that the city offers and wants to continue to offer. And then we would make a recommendation on what ballot measure looks like it has a chance and present that for council discussion. Next slide. On the public outreach side, we would engage while you have the quantitative research going on the more qualitative side, which is also really important, to understand where your key stakeholders are, doing some outreach to the business community, which I know you also probably have already done, and creating, based on the polling, a message toolkit for everybody to understand what information is most important for residents to hear, and pull the fact sheet, FAQ, a web page content, some direct mail, informational, non-advocacy, because as you know, the city cannot directly advocate, but you can inform, and then a community survey that would be, again, on the qualitative side, but would give more than just the sample size, which I think we were looking at about for the poll. We were aimed for about 400 sample size. We would look at opening up that for a separate survey that any community member can take. And most of the time we find that those surveys actually reflect what we see in the quantitative research, but it does help to give more far and wide options for people to participate in that and give them an opportunity to weigh in with their feedback. And we've had a lot of good success engaging folks when they have an opportunity to actually provide feedback to you. We can also map that participation, that public participation, on a website on our civicmike.com webpage, where we would have a page just for the city of Lemoore to let people sign up for updates and continue to get information as the city makes a decision about how to move forward and ultimately decide, to potentially place a measure before voters, to provide voters with a way to understand what that measure would do and how they can be involved. In the next slide. So these are basically the phases that I mentioned: the public opinion research, some community outreach. And then if you are looking at a November 2024 measure, the council will need to take action in early July. So, before that, you would want to have looked at the research, both on the polling and on the community outreach side, have your discussion on with each other and the public, and make a final determination, and we would assist you with developing that language. Once you place a measure on the ballot, then we could also assist with sending information out to the community through a mailer about what the measure would actually accomplish, and the actual language of the ballot label, and how people can vote and have their voices heard, as the ultimate decision will be theirs. And that's the end of our formal slides. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from council?
Oh, and Gene just let me know that he is on, so we at least have him via audio. And Gene, I don't know if you would like to add anything, how much of what the presentation of yours I tried to cover. And I think, Jean, you have to unmute yourself. He's actually listed Nathan under Carol Rossi's name. I don't know if you can unmute him. He's saying he cannot unmute himself.
I'm unmuted.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about that. Computers, technology, can't live without them, can't live with them. You know how it is. I'm not having heard what Rochelle said. It's hard for me to know what I need to add, except to say that there's should be able to get something close to 400 interviews with people who are likely to vote in the November election. And we know that because of the voting history we have of people. We know if they vote or if they don't vote. We want to make sure we don't interview people who are just on the rolls but never vote. That's just a waste of our time and your money. And we will, I think Rochelle probably went over the sort of basics of what we kind of cover in the poll, which will, hopefully lead us to figuring out what's the best thing for you all to do and what sort of election you have the best chance to win at, to get you the most money that you need. I should probably just answer questions now, not having any idea what else Rochelle talked about, and before I start repeating ourselves.
Go ahead, Mr. Goring.
Good evening. There are a couple of questions. When you in your proposal, you talk about likely voter in Lemoore. Could you give us a picture of what you know about Lemoore in terms of what's a likely voter?
Well, likely voters is what we will find when we go over the voter registration lists have on them every election going back many, many years. We won't go back that far. But the first thing we'll do is say, okay, if somebody was registered to vote and didn't vote in 2020, they're probably not going to vote this time either. So they're out. But if they were registered and they voted, they definitely are in our universe. And then we'll expand that among people who have registered since the November 2020 election and have had a chance to vote sometime or other in any of the elections since then. And we'll see where that comes out. We'll compare it to what the turnout was in the 2020 election and try to pretty much mirror what we saw 4 years ago, or well, now 3 years earlier.
Your sample size, there's roughly a little over 12,000 registered voters in the city of Lemoore.
Yeah.
You think 200 is a good, 150 to 200 is a good interview?
Well, we're going to try to get 400. We're going to try to get 400 if we can. I think on further reflection, we should certainly be able to get up to 300. That's for sure. And there's a reasonably decent chance we can get, if not 400, close to it.
So in your proposal under cost, instead of 150 to 200, it should be 300, right?
300 to 400.
3 to 4. Okay.
Yeah, Mayor and council members, that was one thing on here. When we bring this forth, there will be some changes. This was kind of the first pass, and after discussions with Mr. Bregman, I asked if we could get a proposal to get up to 400 likely voters. So it's going to go up a little bit, but we're still working through that to bring back to council at a later date.
And my final question is, it looks like of all the public sector clients you've had, you've only had about 6 small cities. What's been your difference? What's the difference that you've noticed between the smaller cities and the larger municipalities that you've worked with?
Well, oftentimes it's the demographics of them are going to be different. Also, people in smaller communities tend to be more closely knit. They are more likely to know their neighbors and their neighbors to know them. And it becomes a much more personal sort of campaign that ends up having to be run than you would say in Fresno, where you've got lots and lots of people. That's much more, I guess, what they call retail versus wholesale politics. And you really want to get to that level of community that you don't necessarily can get in a larger city.
Thank you.
I have a couple.
Sure.
So as far as needs and priorities and on the scope of services, you're talking about demographic profile of our city voters. Can you kind of
Mhm.
walk me through what that will look like?
Well, what it will look like is it will be a mirror of the likely voters in the November 24 election. And again, that starts with those voter registration rolls because we know who votes and we have a lot of data on those people. Most of them we have gender, we have age, we have party registration, and we make sure that our results reflect what your community is going to look like in November of 24.
My next question is to reach accurate representation of our voting population. You talk about doing a scientific sample selection. What does that look like?
Well, again, it goes back to looking at the folks who we know are voters, as opposed to just calling anybody, or even just calling anybody as a registered voter. So you're using the data that you have to make sure you focus on the people who actually are going to show up and vote in November. Now it's a lot. It's the presidential year. I have not double checked that to see what the turnout was last time, but it's probably going to be something similar this time. And it's a lot of folks. It's most of the registered voters, but it's not all of them by any means.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? We'll go ahead and open up to the public. Is there any public comment for this item?
Dave Brown, 89 Devon Drive, Lemoore. Demographics is good, but before you pull something, something that wasn't covered in this was the education of the citizens and how the current tax rate is distributed. You can call people up on the phone all day long and say, what do you think about the tax rate? But if you don't let them know that about that 7.25% tax rate, how it's distributed and who gets what portion of it, how can you make an informed decision? Question, the estimated cost of what this is going to cost. Once again, you need to educate the people before you ask the people the questions. Some people are going to know it, some people ain't. And what small municipalities in the valley has this contractor dealt with? Okay, you can have somebody that's dealt with some small community up north or down south, and the demographics is different. So those would be some questions I'd like to have answered. And once again, at education, educating the people, once again is important. They need to know how much money really the city of Lemoore gets, which is less than 1% of the 7.25% sales tax. That needs to be driven hard. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I can respond to that if you'd like. So the cities they've worked towards are here in the area are the city of Coalinga, city of McFarland, Orange Cove, and Parlier are probably more the size of Lemoore in the valley that they've worked with. And Mr. Brown, I completely agree with you on the education. So we started that process at the September 29th special meeting to kind of talk about how we got here, and we showed how taxes are distributed throughout the city. I'm also having a roundtable tomorrow with community leaders and all of our nonprofit organizations to discuss that exact thing with them to kind of get the word out there. And then obviously when we get contracts signed up for polling and this, that'll be a topic of conversation as well.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for any final comments, questions.
Yeah, I have a question. Now, you guys said there's 12,000 voters in the city of Lemoore, registered voters, and are we looking at the high likelihood ones, the middle likelihood ones to vote, or obviously we're not looking at the low ones, but of those, do we have any numbers so far that are part of the 12,000 registered? Because 400 people is a lot, but it's not nearly what 12,000 people are. And I don't know. I just didn't know. And where would we be getting? I know where I would be getting the list at, so I'm asking, where would you be getting the list at to make this call list?
Okay. We don't know exactly what, first thing I do, which I have not done yet, is check and see what the turnout was 4 years ago, assuming that that's about as big a turnout as we're going to get. And that's sort of the baseline of the size of the universe that we're going to look for. And get the likely voters who kind of most likely fit the profile that fits into getting us that kind of size of a universe. As I said before, starting with, they voted 4 years ago. They're definitely in. They voted 4 years ago, they're probably going to vote again. And then we'll go from there and see what other folks are available or what their history shows. When you do any subsample of a population and you do 400 interviews, whether if it's a city of 12,000 or 12 million, as long as it's been done properly, you should be able to get, and you will get responses that fall within the statistical margin of error. Just as an example, for instance, between 2014 and 2022, we had 46 clients who were public entities that had measures on the ballot to raise funds in one form or another, and all 46 won their elections. So that helps. That's the proof that what we're doing is getting our clients the kinds of answers that they're going to need going forward. It's not a census, If we interviewed all 12,000 people who raised a vote, that would be a census. It's not a sample. It would be nice to do that, but it's certainly not realistic.
Well, 73.86% turned out for elections in 2020, according to the county.
Okay, in the city of Lemoore.
That's total, but 73% turned out for the 2020 election.
In looking at and it doesn't break down like for the presidential vote, but in 2020, we had less than 2,000 people vote for the council seats that were open in Lemoore. And in the non-presidential election year, it was 1,200.
So if our turnout 4 years ago was 73.6%, I'd also kind of want to take a look and see what was it in 2016, if we could find that out, and then make a judgment of what's a reasonable percentage of the current vote that we think would probably come out and vote in this time. So it sounds like it's around 75%, roughly 3 out of every 4 registered voters will probably vote. And it's our job to try to figure out from their history how to accurately identify them.
Yeah, but I think it's going, it's 30%.
If I could go back and make a correction, that was per council area, but if you combine them all, we had somewhere around 5,500 voters in Lemoore.
There's always a drop off from the top of the ticket as you go down. And it's the job of all those down ballot campaigns to get their voters to remember that they're not just voting for president or president in the US Senate, that there's a whole bunch of important elections happening at the same time, and they need to vote for those too. Like I said, that's the job of those campaigns. Those council candidates, those ballot measure advocates, and how well they do their job will be reflected.
And then one of my last questions are, will we be utilizing city employees to do any of this legwork?
No. The only work that they do is, and Nathan and anybody else he designates, to educate us to make sure we're asking the right questions.
That makes sense. Okay.
Do you have any?
It's all professional.
The consultant agreement.
I do have a follow-up question if I can, with respect to David's point in this consulting agreement. Under item 9, you talk about city's responsibility.
Is that the other, is that MBS's?
That's a consultant agreement.
Yeah.
Is this
9,
not the same?
section 9.
So, yeah, so on the consultant agreement, that would be the agreement with NBS. So that would be directed to Rochelle. Gene is the other memorandum where he gave me the polling information, and this is kind of just a rundown of scope of services.
This is the same outfit though. I mean,
No, 2 different companies.
oh, okay.
Yeah, one's a polling firm, and then the other one works with them to make sure we're getting the right questions, and then they help guide the city after the polling and we know what our target is. Then that's when MBS kind of works with the city and gets us all the way through the campaign, the marketing of the whole thing, and gets it to the ballot.
And the cost of that, it says that one's has a breakdown that's looked like it's 42,000. I didn't realize these were 2 different consultants or 2 different, I mean, one says MB, so obviously it's not Gene Bergman, but so it's 42 for one, and then the other one's 20.
20 currently,
No.
but I did ask him to go up to a sample size of up to 400. So we had that discussion just recently, so I'm waiting on that to come back, but both these will be coming to council for a vote at a consequent council meeting, and they'll be in full then, and won't be, these aren't marked draft, but these are still kind of draft copies.
Okay.
Gene, I have one more question if you're still there.
Sure, I'm here.
About how long ago did you work for Kalinga? And approximately what % of voters did you survey then?
The second question, I have absolutely no idea. I'd have to go back and look that up. That's right. When we did it, it was somewhere in that 2014 to 22 period, but again, I'd have to look up the exact date. Rochelle also asked Nathan if you might want to unmute her so she can answer some of the questions as well. There you go. You're unmuted.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. So just to address the councilman's question on the professional service agreement for the city's responsibility, really that's the legal language for what, as Gene mentioned, just getting information from the city, working with staff to understand about the facts about around the budget and the issues so that we can accurately pose questions that for the polling, as well as any information that we will be utilizing to reach out to the public and inform them, as one of your members of the public mentioned, about how existing sales tax revenues are utilized and other issues that the city wants to communicate about the need for additional revenues. So it's really just simply, allowing us to communicate so that we can get that kind of information from you about that. I'm looking at our contract, and it's the fee for service is 30,000, estimated expenses of 4,500, and then there's an additional estimated mail cost for mailing. So that's the other piece of in addition to Jean's cost for polling.
Okay, because I agree with Mr. Brown as far as educating our voters. And that's why I asked the question about how you're going to create the demographic profile and to identify our needs and priorities.
Well, we will be meeting with Nathan and his team to have a really firm understanding of the budget needs and understand the outreach that we'll be doing through the polling and public engagement will help us understand your communities. We'll have all of the statistics on the demographics, but we'll want to hear from them on their priorities and their concerns. And so that outreach will help inform your decision ultimately.
Thank you.
And then I have a follow-up question to that too. Not that I would like the answers unless you know off the top of your head tonight, but subsequent meetings, the years for Kalinga, McFarland, Orange Cove, and Parlier, the years you guys consulted with them. And then also what you guys did, if you can release that, what you guys suggested, what they wanted, and what the success rate was of all 4 of those locations.
Well, I can tell you they all won. And in Parlier's case, certainly, I don't know the other, but Parlier had lost several times before they hired us. And then they won.
But they won 1 cent or 1%. What'd they win? What? To hire a dog catcher? You don't need a dog catcher.
It was a tax measure.
Okay,
These are all tax measures. These are all revenue raisers.
okay.
I have a question, probably more for Nathan. Under recitals in the consulting agreement, it says obtain consulting services for public safety ballot measure. Is that what we're titling it, or it's on the first page?
Where are you looking at?
Item A.
Item A.
Yes.
That's like in our first conversations, because the big impact could potentially be against the police department. So that was in our original conversations. But again, this is just to kind of get the ball rolling to see where we need to start, what we need to do. So we're at the very infancy stage, and I get y'all want more answers than we're probably giving you tonight, but I've just reached out to these folks within the last 30 days. So until we get some questions, answers, what you're looking for, and get the scope and get rolling, I didn't have them go out and start collecting all the data in the counties, because I haven't given them anything yet. We haven't exchanged anything as far as contracts or fees or anything like that. So we're still this is kind of get to know them, if you'd answer questions. So when we come back and we vote and we get rolling, that we've got the input from the council as well as staff, kind of what we want them to focus on. So this is kind of more just to get your questions out there and ideas, so they kind of know what the expectation is, not just from me and my staff, but from this council as well.
So is that the intention to have another follow-up meeting with the council and them?
Well, no, I was going to use this study session to get back with them to finalize everything, and then come back to council with what we think is the game plan. Now, any of this, as we go out and get the information, what we think we might need might change based on the data they give us. So we can't really make many assumptions, but we're going to let the polling numbers drive and steer us through this to give council the best information possible to kind of give us authorization or not to go out to try to get some additional funding.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? No? Okay, thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you. Glad I could finally make it and get up.
Item 1-2, public workshop proposed 2024-2032 housing element update and the fair housing analysis. Mr. Brandt.
Good evening, council. Steve Brandt, city planner. As you know, the city has a general plan. It's made up of different topic areas that are called elements. And one of those elements is the housing element. The housing element is a little unique from the others in that all the other parts of the general plan, the city gets to decide when to make updates to it. The housing element, the state tells us when to update the housing element, and this is the year to do that. So it usually comes every 8 years or so. And in the past, we've gone through this several times before, obviously. The 4 cities in the county, as well as Kings County, have worked together to prepare one combined document that can serve all 5 of the jurisdictions. That's been proved successful in helping us to get through the state approval process, as well as save time and expense by sharing resources. So we're doing that again this year, and the county planning department is taking the lead in that. They've hired a Realty Planners Group to assist in preparing the document, and Isaac George from that group is here tonight to have a workshop to discuss what's happened so far and where we're going in the future. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. George, who's got a presentation for you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council, city attorney, city manager, members of the public, staff. My name is Isaac George. I am the consultant working on this multi-jurisdictional housing element. As staff has mentioned, this is the only element that needs to be certified by the state. Pretty much what we will put into the housing element in terms of programs are mandated by state law. And if we do not provide what they are looking for, the state has a tendency to tell us what we should include. So we have prepared a PowerPoint, and we would go through the PowerPoint slides and explain what they are. And at the end, the council could ask questions of us and then open it to the public, because one of the key aspects of today's meeting is to solicit input from members of the public. So before I start with the slides, may I pass this sign-in worksheet so that we can tell the state that there were members of the public who were present here. That often has been a problem where public participation is nil, comments are nil, and in that case, they want us to do additional work at a later stage. To avoid it, at least we can say that there were members of the public available to attend this workshop. May I present this to staff? The process of preparing the housing element starts with the public workshop. That's the first one that we are doing today. And essentially the draft housing element looks at the existing housing element, its programs, and we will review what has worked and what has not worked. Then we will create new programs for the next cycle, which is called the 6th cycle housing element. for the next 8 years, which will be from the 23-32 period. As part of the preparation of the draft housing element, we also prepare a basic perfunctory environmental analysis. Typically, they are called exemptions or an ISMND, initial study mitigated negative declaration. That's because the housing element is a policy document and it doesn't have any other particular environmental issues that we would expect from a typical development project. That would be different if the state requires us to do rezoning concurrent with this plan. Where we are located, looking at the jurisdiction, the location, we do not see the necessity for any additional zone changes, and therefore we do not expect any advanced level of environmental review on this plan. Once we prepare the draft document, it will be published with a 30-day notice of availability for the public to review, comment, and that is the state law, which requires us to be published. And then subsequent to that, we will send this to HCD, which stands for the Housing and Community Development Department of the state, to review and provide us feedback. So they may say, if they're very happy, they may say that, yes, Isaac, you have done a great job. Yes, city, county, you've done a great job and we are going to approve it. But that's rarely the case. And they would say, well, we are missing some explanations. We are missing certain projects. We need to relate the findings to some of the programs that we are recommending. And they will ask us to revise the draft document. And once the draft document is revised, it will go back to HCD again. Initially, they have a 90-day period to respond. And the second set of draft that they will receive would have about a 60-day time frame to respond. Usually they are pretty good in responding with a faster timeline and turnaround, but it depends on staff availability and their schedule, how busy they are. And once they give us a statutory approval, then the city is supposed to adopt it. The city council is supposed to adopt it. And once it is adopted, with a copy of the resolution of adoption and the final document, we will send it back to HCD for what is called certification. And once it is certified, it becomes a legally defensible document, at least in the opinion of the state. And we'll go to the next slide. We are looking at a timeline here. Within about 2 to 3 months, we hope to provide you a draft document that will be the housing element. And in addition, starting from this year onwards, the state has been asking cities and counties to prepare a full-fledged fair housing analysis. The fair housing law has been in place for many, many years. However, the state has not been really asking for specific fair housing studies. The study itself is as big as the housing element. They run into 150 to 200 to 300 pages long and therefore expensive. Based on the fair housing analysis, we will go into some of the details as to what the components of a fair housing analysis is. We will hope to adopt the housing element sometime in April. You might say what the timeline generally prescribes by statutes is that by January 31st, the statute says we must have, for this county and under this COG jurisdiction, we should have a certified housing element. However, the state law also provides you another additional 4 months to be able to complete if there is something that needs to be stitched up. So you might ask, is there anything wrong in taking that additional time to get it certified? The only problem is if you are required by the state to have a rezoning, the typical law says that if you need to rezone additional land to comply with the requirements of the RHNA, which is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, a set of numbers that we are supposed to build or facilitate building. I mean, if we don't have the money, we don't build, but we have to facilitate through zone changes and having the right policies and programs. So if we go into the 4-year extension and still don't comply, then the law requires that this rezoning that you have to do must be done in 1 year. And that's kind of a penalty. Otherwise, you have 3 years to typically do it. Now, generally for the benefit of the public, they might say what a housing element is. It is basically the city's vision to provide housing for all income groups. And that is a catchword, for all income groups. And this is done every 8 years now. And we also have to implement the housing policies in an affirmative fashion. They call it affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is a federal and state law. The steps in updating housing element is starting with, as I've mentioned, the review and revision of the housing element as it exists, incorporating new programs based on our analysis of what has worked, what has not worked, and based on new laws, which says that you ought to have specific programs and certain code amendments. Many of these results in zoning code amendments. Say, for example, ADUs, accessory dwelling units, have to be approved under SB 9, as well as other rules that are existing in the housing law that you have to permit them ministerially. So if in our zoning code, we need a conditional use permit or special design reviews, it has to be streamlined and has to be approved ministerially for affordable housing projects. We will, as part of the study, perform what is called a site inventory. This is basically all our vacant lands by parcel number, by zones, by acreage, by square footage. And then from this year onwards, we also have to show what kind of housing do you expect to build? Is it a very low income housing, a moderate income housing, or above moderate income housing based on that location and what we are planning to do? So the catch here is this. Let's say in our town, we have an area we identified with lots of vacant land, and we say, yeah, we have, a majority of these parcels in the west quadrant of our town, and we are going to build a lot of low-income housing. Yes, that's a flag. So they say, why did you come up with that idea to have low income just in one side of the city? Because it's supposed to be everywhere without discrimination. That's their basic point. The affordability level of the site inventory is the new thing. As I mentioned, we have to say we will build these on these particular parcels, whether it is lower, above, moderate, or moderate income. And then the study must include what is called the affirmatively furthering fair housing program and the fair housing analysis. Let's first start with the fair housing analysis, which gets into a lot of details with an outreach. Similar to the housing element outreach, we also need to have an outreach for the fair housing component, and this meeting will serve the same purpose. And we hope the public would have some comments that we can get. It starts with an assessment of fair housing in our town. We will look at key data and background information, our existing fair housing enforcement and outreach capacity. So in terms of fair housing enforcement, they want to know if we have a mechanism or an office where the public can make a complaint about housing discrimination. That somebody has been discriminated, it's an affordable housing project, but they have not been given a position, or someone has been discriminated on a loan application that they have made where they could not get the loan. So the question is, are we big enough to handle such kind of issues? Typically, cities don't have the personnel to have these, and most times it is handled by the county or in association with a contract with a nonprofit entity, which has attorneys and people who can handle this kind of issues. It also gets into the more sensitive, touchy subjects such as integration and segregation patterns and trends. I mean, these are things that has passed on from history. But today, if you really look at, someone would wonder, why is that a major issue or not? Say, for example, when we talk about segregation patterns and change of population, there were communities that were majority white that has become now majority Hispanic, almost 95% Hispanic. Now, when we go into a community like that, even there you will find segregation statistics. I have a community that I'm working on now, which is 95% or more Hispanic, and there too we will find poverty differences, Gini index, which is about income differences in community. And the state also wants to know, why is that so? And what the city can do to ameliorate that kind of situation. We will get into some of the more details later in some of the slides. We will talk about disparities in access to opportunity. So that essentially means whether or not all our people in town have good schools. I mean, if we have good school, that means our children are well educated. They at least have the opportunity. Do we have regional recreation facilities, parks? Do we have sufficient infrastructure in all our neighborhoods, nice walkable streets? Do we provide for good mobility? Do we have a dial-a-ride system? Do we provide handicap accessible transportation for people to be transported to regional facilities? So mobility and transportation comes into that picture. We will also talk about disproportionate housing needs in jurisdictions. And we will talk about displacement risk. Displacement risk typically happens in examples where, let's assume that we have a affordable housing project with a affordability covenant for 55 years, and the covenant runs out, and then it could potentially become market rate. Sometimes the owners decide to keep it as an affordable housing project, but sometimes they do have the right to convert that into a market rate project, resulting in the displacement of the residents. And in that case, the state wants to know, what have you thought about it? Do you have any kind of policies? One example that I can think about is us instituting through our zoning code requirements on such projects. If it has the potential to displace people, then we can require them to give additional noticing times to the residents and some other mitigation measures. And there are certain examples and programs that we can incorporate into the plan. Then again, the site inventory itself is also tied to the fair housing analysis. As I have mentioned previously, they want to know that low-income housing is not disproportionately concentrated in one area of town, and therefore you reserve these localities for low income. In other words, it has to be evenly distributed, and that's the focus. Then we will end up those discussions with identification of contributing factors, goals, and actions. I mean, why something happens, what goals do you have, what action plans do you propose? And that's the essence of it. The preliminary observations of the housing element and fair housing for our community will be discussed in the following slides. When we analyzed the population from 2010 census and the 2020 census, we see that we have a total population of 25,867, and we have a household population of 27,014. Usually when you talk about the total population, that includes the population residing in the city beyond the household population. Household population are the people within households. The population in total population usually will have, or in addition, must have people in group quarters, the military barracks that we have, but they are not counted as households. In this one, we see that there is a discrepancy in that total population versus household. And that discrepancy obviously is because of the time period that data has been obtained. So we are going to verify to see if we have a better reason for it, but I noticed that difference. Their total population should have been much more. than the household population because we have the base and we might have other institutional facilities, group quarters and things like that. But we will clarify that point further when you get the draft. Our city has expanding population about roughly 44%. We have about approximately 9,000 households. Owner occupied are about 52%, which is good. That means more than 50% of the people own. They have the pride of ownership and they own it. And the persons per household is about 2.94. So a rather small number. The median household income is about 68,000 plus. And we also have slightly high poverty levels of about 12.7%. And this data, as you see from the sources, is the census 2020 count, full count. And ACS data, which stands for the American Community Survey, which is part of the census, but it is a running average, say from year 2020 to 2025, 2021 to 26, and it is an estimate. And therefore, being an estimate has a margin of error. It is not a complete count. But ACS data is the one where you would get a lot of non-demographic data, especially regarding economics and poverty and things like that, comes from those data bases. Now, again, talking about fair housing, we must, in the fair housing analysis, assess the city's diversity index, how diverse is the racial and ethnic composition of our community. And in terms of statistics, if you have, it could vary from 1 to 100. If it's 1, is perfect. If it is 100, that means there is much higher diversity. We have to analyze what is called the Gini index. It is about income disparity, how our populations, are classified based on their income. We know what the median income is, but we will also, as part of the draft, will show what percentage of people are less than the median, how many percentage of the people are above the median. So we'll give you a complete table showing the percentages in each and every category. Dissimilarity index is another index that talks about the distribution of ethnic or racial populations in different neighborhoods within the city. So we have to look at overall what that is, but also we need to look at what's in the different neighborhoods. And we will provide you very detailed maps and graphs that are prepared by the state, as well as TCAC. TCAC stands for the Tax Credit Allocation Committee. So they created these statistics, develop maps and things like that. And so we basically will go and look for our community and then look for these indices and then pull out the maps that will explain a certain scenario or a story. We also have to look at the racial or ethnic concentration of poverty in the town. It is called RECAP. We also will look at something called RCAA, which is racially concentrated areas of affluence. In very likely scenario, this has a certain prerequisite in order to term a society as coming under RCAA. The two rules are that any census blocks in the city with a median household income of 125,000 and a population of 80% or more being white only. And that's a rare combination to get with the high income. And not that there aren't communities where you would find in a city that is more than 80% white population and have a very high income of $125,000 or more. And that might exist in some place, but in our community, that's probably rare to see. And we will look at the details when the draft is prepared. Disparities in access to opportunities, we will look at the different areas of the town to see whether there is high resource or moderate resource. Remember, we talked about the access to resources and opportunity in indices. And so we will look at areas of high segregation and poverty, if there is, based on census tract data. Disproportionate housing needs, talk about overpayment and cost burdens. It is pretty self-explanatory as to what they are. I mean, our ability to own a house, is it affordable for us? In a very generic sense. HUD determines that it is affordable if you don't spend more than 30% of your gross income. That is your ability to own a house, right? But when it comes to affordability under a affordable housing project, that's a different set of norm where they would look at the area median income, which is determined by HUD and the state and published and updated every year. And then they will go and look who will qualify for a subsidized rating under an affordable housing project. Say, for example, are you below 80% of the area median income, 50% below the median income, or 30% below the median income? And depending on where you fall, people who are poor would be able to qualify to get into an affordable housing project. And it also parried with the number of people in that household. Father, mother, plus 2 children, yeah, you qualify for some. If you have 4 children, then you will qualify for a little bit more discount. And that's how typically housing authorities and nonprofits run the housing programs. And we talked about displacement earlier. The site inventory is also linked to fair housing, as we have talked about the distribution of available vacant lots and what we plan on doing it. And finally, we will discuss the contributing factors, goals, and actions, just like in the housing element. And then now we come to the main core housing element itself, looking at what our damage is. In other words, in the next years, how much do we have to say that we are going to add to our community in terms of absolute housing production? And that is what is called RHNA. It stands for Regional Housing Needs Allocation or Assessment Numbers. And for our community, we have 2,329 houses that we will have to add. I will clarify when I say we will have to add, which is 25% of the total requirement for the entire county. Unincorporated county under the county's jurisdiction, the county administration's jurisdiction is different from the total number for the entire county. So what I've mentioned in terms of apportioning land and everything to build so much, well, how can you build if you don't have any money, right? The city is not in the business of building houses because we don't have the money. However, the critical component is that we must facilitate the production of it with adequate rules in place, whether it is ministerial or with a CUP or with a design review, which especially for affordable housing has been done away with, many of the new statutes that have come in place. And then be able to allow that to happen with the right zoning, with the right density. And that's what we have to do. The city also must strive to be able to bring in additional revenues from the state by applying for CDBG home if you have a housing department, and if you apply for CDBG in home. Some cities don't. I know some cities literally don't apply for anything, but some do. There are entitlement cities and non-entitlement cities. Cities with less than 50,000 population directly go to HCD, Housing and Community Development Department of the state, and we can apply for home CDBG grants. And I think these monies that we got to pay for consultants to do these studies, planning studies, also come from SB2 funds or LEAP funds or REAP funds. I'm sure you're familiar with those that we have received recently. The county has got millions of dollars in REAP and LEAP funds, and we use it for infrastructure. We use it for housing. We can use it for code enforcement, to give or create housing programs, to give first-time homebuyer programs. The problem that, from my experience, having been a building director, community development director, a planner for over 30 years prior to getting into my consulting service, is that small cities don't have the people. They just don't have the means to be able to go after it. It is not easy just to get the grant, but it's more difficult to administer it because we need full-time people to administer them. And that is not an easy job, because for everything that you do, you have to comply with CEQA. You have to also comply with NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act of the feds, and it gets complex, and you cannot make any mistake. If you make any mistakes, they will penalize you. But it is one of our responsibilities to make sure that we go and apply for this funding, and we promote housing for all income groups, and we also provide housing or shelters by the city or in union with the county or any other nonprofits for homeless people. They are called navigation centers. They are facilities that are transient. They will come in and then look for permanent housing in some form or the other. It has a social component or equity component in that. So these are things in the past we have never talked about, but nowadays they are asking us to talk and act upon. Finally, we will provide a chart like this as to what our quantitative housing objectives are, which obviously have to meet the RENA 6 cycle allocation. The second line, please ignore that because that's really not correct. What it says is that remaining obligations from the 5th cycle. Honestly, we have no remaining obligations from the 5th cycle. If you have done whatever we had to do, we promised, we did. If we couldn't do it. 6th cycle starts brand new. This is something that I carried forward long time ago from another city where we told, we even looking at cumulatively, the city only needs just few houses. And I erroneously copied that for this discussion, but please ignore that line. We will look at our total housing obligations. Typically, they will be the new construction that will meet RENA requirements. In addition, we will also say how much we could potentially rehabilitate through a code enforcement program, maybe having a housing program where we would give some small amounts of money to rehab housing, how much we can do to conserve as well. And it could be in addition to the obligations that we have and they want us to fill out. In one of the comments that I received on a different city, I just left it blank because we will meet the obligations, but nothing else. But they said, well, what else do you plan on doing these? So I need to fill in some numbers. Whether I achieve or not, I still have to, in good faith, say, we could probably rehab 5 homes, conserve 5 homes or something like that. So that's in good faith. As we do, as staff has mentioned, the housing element is one of the general plan elements. And anytime we update one element, the law requires that it must be internally consistent with all the other elements and conform. In other words, we cannot have a conflicting policy or a program that will negate one aspect of the general plan. In simple terms, sometimes people say, you have this general plan requirement of a land use designation, and then you have a zoning designation. The zoning code says some other number than what is in the general plan. What prevails? Case law tells us that the general plan prevails over zoning code, even in case there is an error. But in between the elements of the general plan, you cannot have such errors. I mean, not that inconsequentially there may be errors that we would find, but you have an obligation to fix it. And anytime when you adopt one, we got to look at any other parts and see something needs to be fixed. And that's as simple as that. We talked about the environmental quality determination. A lot of cities, especially small cities, go for what is called the common sense exemption. It is basically saying that CEQA, which stands for the California Environmental Quality Act, requires you to analyze impacts if something is foreseeable. But if you foresee having no impact at all, especially when you are preparing policy documents and such, then there is an exemption that you can claim under CEQA guidelines section 15061B3, and that is called the common sense exemption. Now, coming to community input, what we would like to achieve from today's presentation and this meeting is any help from the participants as to what our housing needs are, what challenges do we face, what opportunities are available in the public's mind in the city to support housing needs, what should be top 5 priorities if we have priorities. We can talk about so many items that we want, but looking at a didactic logic, you would say, yeah, I know you want to get 100 things done, but can you tell me the top 10, what you want to do? And that's the same idea here, that we want to say what your top priorities are, what the community sees. So in terms of the next step, we will prepare the draft, HCD will review it, and upon approval, it will be adopted by the city council and both the housing element and the fair housing analysis. And hopefully HCD will certify and bless all our programs. And staff will work with you, with your staff, county staff, to make sure that we comply with the requirements of the law. And that's my job. So at this time, I would request the council to ask any clarifying questions on any housing issues. If I don't know, I'm sure the city attorney is here. She knows everything. And at the end of your question session, open it to the public to see if they have any concerns, what they want, or if they have any questions that I could answer. Thank you. I end my presentation.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from council? Comments?
Yes, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Councilman.
It just surprises me how much the state is in our business.
True. There's no surprise.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
It's a lot of work.
If you're dealing with a median income of $68,000, what does that tell you? What's the math about the top income?
I have seen communities with $78,000, $80,000.
Yeah.
I'm currently working on a small community called San Juan Bautista. I believe their incomes are like up in this 76,000, which is a high number. 68 also is a good number. Honestly, I don't recollect exactly what's the California median income. I think they are probably sub 40s. So when you compare that, and again, Lemoore is not the typical town. We do have a lot of people in town who are it's a diverse population here.
Yeah,
with the Air Force Base.
One size fits all approach to this problem, and
there is no one size fits all approach. It's just that the law is comprehensive in having to meet requirements of a particular jurisdiction as we present the statistics and the data and the issues and our needs and wants. So it's not one size fits all. Everyone interprets it in a different way and presents programs in their own fashion.
Well, my observation of what happens is if you have a median income of $68,000, okay, and not much more above that, you have a couple of options. you have to build smaller homes, less size, okay, less lots, greater congestion, and that affects the quality of the cities. Okay. It also works against us in terms of we're not offering low density homes for people who are out there, who might be at the top of that as well. And so we end up, I think, creating significant problems for cities in terms of creating congestion. If you can put 300 homes on 50 acres and only 2 entrances and exits, you're creating problems, long-term problems for the city. And that goes to quality of life issues. And that's where the state doesn't help us.
True. I mean,
It's all formula driven as opposed to what a community wants. I mean, I guess we could say, you know, if we were of like minds, we could say we want to put a moratorium on all housing. What's the state going to do?
true. Every scenario provides a challenge. You know, the state is looking at housing as problematic, that there is a dearth of need for housing. We don't satisfy our housing requirements, especially at affordable levels. So they are coming up with these policies to, generally speaking, increase densities.
How are the homes on wheels going to affect us?
Pardon me?
The homes on wheels, you know, if we decide to allow people to put one of these homes on wheels in their backyard, is that going to help our city, or, you know, I mean, what?
I don't think there is a state law for permitting or having to allow homes on wheels, but if a community wants to allow it, that's their choice. And usually that's the decision maker's decision. However, the land use scenario is becoming more challenging because of the prescriptive legislations that the state wants us to do. Say, for example, one of the recent innovations, in a way we can say, is about accessory dwelling units. And there is a similar law under SB 9, State Bill 9, which also allows certain accessory dwelling units, which are slightly different from the other ADUs under the housing law. In that, the SB 9 automatically allows a typical residential lot to be subdivided into 2 automatically. Cities really, if I have a lot and it's sufficient enough to be divided into 2, and I make an application to the city, it has to be approved. But in the olden days, we didn't have to approve it. It's automatic. So such kind of regulations increase density in some point. Also, multifamily, I see 24, 30 units per acre. Sometimes it creates, depending on the location, some impacts, some traffic impacts. But in rural communities, it doesn't have to be the case. If it's in Los Angeles or something like that, which is already congested, then the impacts could be cumulative and it could cause problems. But communities where we have a lot of land around us, unless you are limited by ag land, which has Williamson Act, Prime Act designations, which prohibits you from being able to convert unless you make a penalty for it, pay a penalty for it. They generally see that, yeah, you have land available that you can, based on your need. They're not saying, hey, you become a bedroom community for Corcoran or somebody else. I mean, if you really look at San Jose or San Francisco, many communities have been complaining that we are becoming a bedroom community for the benefit of somebody else, and we don't like it. Yeah, that is probably a true statement. Because what happens is, in order to be economically viable, there is a certain ratio between economic advancement, economic development, as well as building rooftops. So if you have all rooftops, you have liabilities, and you're not really gaining much. People often ask City Hall, I pay property tax. Well, the question is, how much do you pay? You pay, you know how much the city gets from the property tax. So if the county collects $100, the city probably would get 10 or 15 or maybe maximum $20. So with that $20, can I provide you fire department, police department, and all the other facilities that you see around? Oh, really? You guys don't get all these monies that you collect? No, we don't. Somebody mentioned that from the sales tax we collect, we get only a certain percent because it gets apportioned and distributed in many, many ways. So cities are always suffering from this income crunch. How do we raise funds to be able to provide the services? And that's real.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open it up to the public.
Thank you for patiently hearing.
Any public comment?
Hi, Mary Hayes, 149 West Bush. I have a question with building all these homes and having a water shortage. How is that going to impact our community and our quality of life?
Sure.
If we don't have water, we don't have to build. When you build as a physical impact, you got to have adequate infrastructure. That infrastructure means water, sewer facilities, and such. In other words, the state law would prohibit you to be building if you have no water supply or sanitary sewer conditions. So there is no way state legislation can prohibit you by not acting on it. Any physical development that needs certain infrastructure, water or otherwise, is needed. And if it is not there, that's an impact, which on that basis, you could deny a project. Especially when you talk about affordable housing, you cannot deny it unless you have excruciating circumstances where a project is a certain threat to the environment. Otherwise, you cannot really deny a typical affordable housing project. But the question is, right, if you don't have water, that means you have no way of bringing water. If you don't have water resources, you have no aquifers, you have no groundwater, then that's a desert. It's not habitable. But if you have the methods to bring it in some form through some infrastructure funding, yeah, the developer proposing that project is supposed to do it. And that's why we have certain financial improvement districts, that will invest. But if you have no water, then you cannot bring water, right? So it has a tie to how development occurs. There has to be some kind of a correlation in our ability to approve a project with certain resources that are needed to serve that particular development.
I have one other question. How come we came up with the 101% when it said 100%?
Where did you see that?
When you were showing the amount, like we had to have 25%. If you totaled it, it came up to 101.
It's a statistical error.
Oh, okay. Sounds like.
Yeah, sometimes when you add up, it might go over. It is not supposed to go over 100%. It's always 100%. Thank you. Good observation.
Quick question. Dave Brown, 89 Devon Drive. Is Sigma being looked into this? State mandated us to do Sigma, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We're talking about water and all that. is this one of the things that they're looking at when they're doing this survey? Because there's good data there. The municipalities, the county, we all spent a lot of money to do. You know, the state's pushing this on us now, so that's more money coming out of our general fund to pay for this. Yay, Sacramento. But anyway, Sigma, I mean, I know it's not true, but is that one of the things that's being looked at?
It is not necessarily something to be addressed as part of the housing element preparation. However, it would be addressed as part of the land use element. Because the land use element is the one that looks at infrastructure and a relationship between what level of development is proposed and how it can be served with the infrastructure needs that we have. And typically, when you talk about aquifers or regional water, it is not just the city that is involved in it. Regional water agencies and other entities get involved in it, and it's a different ball game. But in preparing a housing element, you don't have to.
Yeah, but see, the thing is.
Mr. Brown, could you speak in the microphone,
Okay.
please? Thank
You're in
you.
the city of Lemoore, so you said Lemoore is part of it, I understand, and I used to be on that board.
Yes.
Okay, but there is data in there about the city of Lemoore, there's data in there about the surrounding communities, it's part of the South Fork Kings. So my thing is, and I should not even say that because now I'm being argumentative and I apologize, but I disagree. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and bring it back to council. Any questions, comments, concerns?
You know, that last comment is kind of relevant. The State Water Resources Board is going to be down here this month for a hearing for Sigma, particularly our region. Yeah,
Tomorrow.
and what will that do to our whole requirement in the state if we're under the state's guidelines with respect to water restrictions? We may not be building a lot of homes. That's real. You never know. I mean, but it's.
I don't think the governor cares.
You're right. I mean, it's wide open.
Nothing else from council? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to closed session. Item 1, liability claim, government code section 54956.95. Claimant, Mrs. Valenzuela. I'll go ahead and adjourn into closed session. Sounded like a gavel, but it wasn't. We're back from closed session. Anything to report out?
Nothing to report, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Moving on to public comment. Public comment will be in accordance with the attached policy. This time is reserved for members of the audience to address the city council on items of interest that are not on the agenda and are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. It is recommended that speakers limit their comments to 3 minutes each, and it is requested that no comments be made during this period on items on the agenda. The council is prohibited by law from taking any action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda. Prior to addressing the council, any handouts for council will be provided to the city clerk for distribution to the council and appropriate staff. The public will have an opportunity to comment on items on the agenda once the item has been called and the mayor opens the item to the public. Is there any public comment?
Good evening, Jeff Martin, American Refuse Thule Trash Company. In March of 2021, Thule Trash Company provided a unsolicited quote for trash service for the city of Lemoore to basically privatize the refuse. I was watching last week's meeting and there was a lot of challenges that I heard coming from the public. There was a lot of highlights that we put within our proposal to the city. And if we could get the opportunity to maybe review a scope of services, we could also provide a competitive quote to the city for refuse services. Thule Trash has been providing trash within the city of Lemoore for over 14 years. We currently still have customers, and under statute 49-520, we will have another 5 years to continue hauling for those customers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment?
Mary Hayes, 149 West Bush. I actually have a few questions. So first, I guess you need to tell me if this is appropriate or not. What are some of the options for raising revenue within the city?
So this time right now is reserved for public comment, and the council's prohibited by the Brown Act from engaging in a back and forth discussion. But you can submit your questions, or you can also meet with the city manager at a time convenient to answer those questions, and then I can assist as well.
Okay, so my questions are, what are some of the options for raising revenue? Where will the additional funding be spent if a measure is passed? And how are we encouraging local owned and operated businesses? And we have projects that have been started but not completed to what they were presented to the community. I wonder sometimes if we take into consideration the lack of confidence our local citizens have in our city manager or our council, and how we are or are not heard. When it comes to the refuse part, I know that they are offering positions, but there are also positions that will be lost. And I want to know what would happen with our infrastructure that we have built for our trash out at the LHS transportation. There's a large amount of infrastructure built out there to accommodate, and what will happen with that as far as our city? How are we managing it in a positive way? I guess mine are more questions. So is it the city manager the only option that I have to speak to, or is there an opportunity for me to question the city council and receive responses?
You can speak to any of us outside of.
Okay.
Here.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, since where is it saying, and I don't mind if you cite it for me.
I believe he's speaking to this, Mary. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Mary. But in terms of having a dialogue with somebody who makes a comment.
Mhm. So under the Brown Act, if you're going to engage in extensive dialogue, it needs to be
Keyword there.
extensive.
dialogue.
Yeah, I think brief comments, but I think where we have the potential to go astray is when one council member comments. So you say, okay, I'd be happy to meet with you, or we had a workshop on this at the last meeting, or we're going to have a potential workshop. And then another council member jumps in with, well, at that workshop, are we going to have X, Y, and Z? And then another, and it becomes this discussion that perhaps other members of the public would want to be part of and also have access to the information. And so we want to make sure it's agendized for those purposes under the Brown Act.
Yeah, but see, we don't even get to that point with Mary's comments here about, which I thought were very good comments.
Absolutely.
Meeting. In terms of my experience as a citizen of this community is we get interest in a topic and that's it. We don't have a follow through. Thank you for shaking your head. Okay. And we get blamed for that as council members.
Right. And I think
I'm not particularly interested in all the shenanigans that went on years ago in this chamber. But in terms of, I'm only speaking for myself, but in terms of an elected member, if somebody comes up with a rational question about what occurred, I don't mind if the mayor or one of my colleagues wants to respond to that. And I understand the dilemma of carrying it too far. And I'm sure the mayor will whack us in order or you. But the point is, there's a decorum that we have to have with the residents of the city that we respect their opinions.
Yeah, absolutely.
She pointed out projects. I'd like to know what those projects are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can ask for more clarification. It just can't turn into this big back and forth. And I think I've advised on that before, example, the last meeting. One other option too for council is during your council comments, you can ask, okay, Nathan, are we going to have a follow-up study session on the outsourcing, or a follow-up study session on the ballot measure and outreach? And that can be something council would like to see in the future on the agenda. So there's also a way to
Yeah.
notify the public at large.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Dave Brown, 89 Devon. Just a real quick reminder, Veterans Day Parade, 10th Annual Veterans Day Parade is weekend, Saturday. Just want to thank City of Lemoore. Everybody from Nick, Oscar, Parks and Recs, you name it over there, stand-up people helped us out. It's a team effort between the city and American Legion and the citizens of Lemoore. So just want to say thank you and see you guys out there.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, Amanda Law. First, I wanted to say great job this year on the flag football for through the city. I know last year I had some specific complaints about it, but had a great experience this year. And I was wondering if maybe they had planned on doing a father-daughter dance this year. Came up in my memories for the last, I don't know, my daughter's 13 now, and she started when she was 3 or 4. So just wondering if that's something that's going to be forthcoming from Parks and Rec. And one more thing I'd like to keep in your guys' ear is the fact that Track 920 has still not made 1 inch of movement. And we are still waiting on our park. We are still waiting for our subdivision to be finished. We have no stoplight. We have no safe passage from north of Hamford-Mona Road at 18 3/4 to Liberty Drive on the other side. And I'm driving by West Hills every day and I see that they're building an entirely new subdivision, and they have at least 30 homes out there started, if not closer to 40 or 50. And Lennar made a lot of promises to us, and we have yet to see any fulfillment of those promises. And as someone who specifically bought where I did because of those promises, it's really disappointing to see a dusty lot with ugly chain link fences and shopping carts being used to pass through the backs of people's, basically the side of their fence through that property. And that's not what was promised. It would be great to see a park in our neighborhood, which, as I pointed out, District E has no parks in the entire district. Every other district in Lemoore has at least one, if not more than one. We're the only district with no park still. And to be able to at least cross to the park in the other district, that I could do so safely with my kids without having to get in the car and make the drive over, which it's not a far drive, but it can be a hassle crossing that road. And to also point out, some of the parks in our city are not that safe lately. And there have been issues with both the actual park facilities, as far as gopher holes, squirrel holes, things of that nature, but people utilizing those parks for less than desirable behavior, drugs, people sleeping in the parks. And I know there's plenty of patrol through there, but what can we as a city do to make sure that we have safe places for our kids to go that aren't covered in graffiti? And there's not people in the bathrooms doing things that I would not let my child within 100 miles of. And my time is up, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? And if you don't mind, Amanda, I'd like to meet with you at some point and go over some of that at a later date. Seeing no other public comment, we'll go ahead and move on. There's no ceremonial presentation. Department and city manager reports.
Good evening again, Mayor and council members. First up tonight will be Chief Kendall.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I have a few things, a few dates to put out on October 30th, and then again on November 1st, we had students from the West Hills College AOJ program come down to our department where they were able to utilize our force options simulator to kind of put things into perspective with the college courses that they're currently working on. That was a good turnout. They enjoyed it a lot. And then going into the important dates, this is kind of becoming our busy season for some of our programs that we run. So the shoe drive, the shopping for that will be November 10th at the Walmart at 10 a.m. The distribution will be Friday, November 17th at the police department at 3 p.m. And then reason for the season and presence on patrol. The shopping dates are December 2nd and December 9th. The wrapping will be on the 12th at the police department. Reason for season is at the police department on the 15th, and then presence on patrol will be December 20th. I'm just kind of getting ahead on some of these dates. I think we only had one council meeting before we got to go shopping. So if you have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Chief. Next update will be Randon Reeder for Public Works.
Good evening, Council. Just a couple updates from Public Works. As far as street projects goes, we just got done today opening for striping projects. So there's going to be a striping project coming through at our next council meeting for award, just for some safety upkeep and things of that sort. Crack fill project is going to start November 19th. So you'll start seeing, I believe, on Lemoore Avenue, some crack fills being done. We are getting quotes for stoplight engineering. So there's going to be some of our CIPs for stoplights. You're going to start seeing engineering come across for those projects to get going. And then lastly, we did just send out a RFQ for on-call engineering. This on-call engineering contract is going to allow us to go after grant funding for state and federal funds more aggressively and basically pre-check a lot of the boxes that they require. So we're going to be able to start really going after grants for a lot of streets and other water and infrastructure projects, unlike before. Any questions for Public Works?
Any of those street lights over there on Hanford Road and
I don't. So I would prefer not to give any details. Just
Why? Is it a secret? What's the difference?
Well, in my experience, we might throw something out, but due to costs and increased across the board, some of the quotes that we've already seen have come in. Our plan was for 2 of them. And we've gotten kind of an updated cost, and we're a little iffy on if we'll be able to do 1 of them. So I don't want to throw out where we're looking at and then not be able to do it.
Let me give you a suggestion.
but doesn't Lennar pay for some of those? Sorry, Frank.
That's getting a little bit, yeah. So depending on the section. So for example, at that intersection that you're referring to, Lennar would have some for that, but and it's warranted with phase 2.
Okay.
That adds another question for another time, but we opened this meeting with a discussion about the possibility of going out for a tax increase. Okay. So those kinds of things, keep in the back of your mind, are reasons why we need additional revenue to finish some projects that we've promised the citizens to do. Okay.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And there's a lot more education that goes with that as well, as to like the complicated aspects of putting a street light. You know, we can't, unfortunately, we all know that a street light there would be extremely beneficial, but unfortunately legalities and warrants stop us from just doing it. And it does make it more complicated.
Yeah. But we also can push a little bit more on the developer not to have it on phase 2, put it on phase 1.
Above your pay grade, though.
Yeah.
I am a management analyst doing the department reports. So any other questions for Public Works?
Did the street study report, and this is probably more than Nathan, does it warrant lights there?
With phase 2.
With phase 2, yes. That's why
Yes.
they go in with phase 2, and that's what the traffic study showed when the project was put forth and approved.
What about the crosswalk phase two too?
Mhm.
Okay.
You typically don't put a crosswalk across 4 lanes without a street light. It's big
Makes sense.
liability.
Makes sense.
Anything else, council?
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Brett.
Just a couple things out of my office. So staff was looking at with CalPERS, the golden handshake, which could give 2 years additional service credits to anybody eligible for retirement if we choose to open a window. CalPERS is working on the studies right now. We should have some data to bring to council right after January from CalPERS on that to see if it's something that we would like to pursue or not. As a result of that, though, we're going to delay the refuse conversation and contracts until we work through that project with CalPERS. Additionally, I have a community roundtable tomorrow. We have about, I think, 18 people signed up for it. So it's some people in this room, some of the community leaders I had mentioned earlier. So that'll be one of many informative meetings. So people can come in and ask questions about actually anything they want. But tomorrow we're going to focus on the budget, and it's kind of going to be a reiteration of what we did here on September 29th to kind of set the base work to start getting people involved and maybe get some support going behind some initiatives for the city. And Amanda had mentioned NFL flag football completed last weekend. Good season. We're collecting all the postseason surveys. From what I've heard, I haven't looked at them, but a lot of good feedback. So we'll be at a future council meeting. We'll bring back the results of the survey from our season. Thank you.
Where's that meeting going to be tomorrow?
At the in the big conference room at the city hall. Yes. That's it. Thank you.
That's it. All right. Moving on to consent calendar, items considered routine in nature are placed on the consent calendar. They will be considered and voted upon in one vote as one item unless a council member or member of the public requests individual consideration. 4-1, approval of minutes, regular meeting, October 17th, 2023. 4-2, approval minutes, special meeting, October 30th, 2023. 4-3, approval, second reading, ordinance 2023-13. Amending chapter 6 of title 1 of the Lemoore Municipal Code relating to city officers and employees to accept the requirements of the penal code relative to the recruitment and training standards of public safety dispatchers. 4-4, approval, denial of claim for Miss Francelia, Venezuela. 4-5, approval, budget amendment for the purchase of information technology server infrastructure for the police dispatch center from redesign in the amount of $112,536.09. Does anybody on council want to pull any of those items?
I'd like to pull 4.5, please.
Any other items? Is there a member of the public that would like to pull any items from the consent calendar? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar 4-1 through 4-4.
Motion.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Orth and a second by Councilmember Garza. Councilmember Orth,
Yes.
Councilmember Garza,
Yes.
Councilmember Gornick,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, 4-5, do you have a specific question on that one?
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about the funds and where is this project in the timeline of getting the dispatch center up and running?
So the funds are coming from the grant funds. It's part of the servers that will run the dispatch center. If you have technical questions, Mike Vargas, our IT manager, is also on the phone. But as far as the timeline, it should fit right into the timeline. This is needed for NGA and the other 911 softwares that are needed. And then these servers are purchased through a competitive agreement that is through Dell. But are you asking if it delays the timeline in particular?
No, and they're purchased from Redesign. Are these refurbished?
No.
Servers?
Redesign is just the name of the company. It is not a refurbished. These are top of the line.
Good enough. Thank you.
Anything else, council?
That was my only question. Was it from the grant money or was it from, okay.
This will have no impact. This has no impact on the general fund. It's all grant funded.
Any other questions from council? No? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and bring it back to council. I'll entertain a motion to approve 5-5.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Gornick and a second by Councilmember Garza. Councilmember Gornick,
Aye.
Councilmember Garza,
Yes.
Councilmember Orth,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. We have no public hearing, no new business. We'll go ahead and move to city council reports and requests. Councilmember Garza.
Okay, I just want to thank the public tonight for their comments. Want to let you know they are truly valued, and we try to be transparent. So, like Mayor said, we're willing to talk to you guys whenever. My next is I just want to thank to all of those, a special thanks to that are serving currently and have served in our militaries, and I'd like to just wish them a happy Veterans Day this weekend.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Orth.
I too would like to speak what my colleague said about the veterans and everybody that served and protect our country, to allow us to do what we do and stand up here and say what they say, what we say. I too love the interactions, and I so much wish we could have a dialogue in public comment. That's one thing about being up here. You learn these rules that you don't like. I don't like that one, but she keeps us out of trouble, so it is what it is. I do believe that this trash situation should go out for an RFP. I believe it should go out. And I think if we're pushing it off till April or May, I think we should, because I truly believe transparency, and if the best is for our general fund, we need everyone to know exactly what we're getting into when we do it. And we've done multiple privatizations, or privatized our systems. We did the golf course, we did water, which is a different story, and we also did our landscaping. 2 of the 3 went out to RFPs, so I don't necessarily, and one being the water, we didn't because we couldn't. We didn't have time. There's a lot of things that we can go into that later on, but we didn't have time to do it. We had to do what we had to do. Truly believe the general fund is needs to be worked on, and the privatization, if we decide to do that, I think it needs to be transparent. Now I really don't know as a single council member if we can make that happen, or I'm pretty sure we probably can. I know there's going to be some concerns about, well, we've already started this process, so it could be unfair for Mid-Valley, but at the end of the day, I think it's fair for our citizens of 27,000 people outweighs the best person should go. And if it was my point, I would like to have many people from the citizens on that RFP grading scale so we get the best for our city. If that's decide what we do. I also think it would be a good idea to look into maybe doing stop hiring employees and just look at everything and sit down and have many study sessions about what's going to happen to our general fund, because it's going to get very interesting in the next couple of years for all of us. With that, anyone wants to talk to me after the meeting, I'll be out there. We can talk. I would love to have a list of projects that were brought up that aren't done. Because, we see what we see, and obviously you have information that I'd love to know. The parks, about the parks, I have one. I have a couple in my district. Heritage, it looks like the squirrels and the gophers and every other underground creature that's been known to the good Lord lives out there. I would love to spend $1 million leveling that place, not tearing it down, but fixing it. But we ordered something a couple years ago and we have a machine that can help that. I don't know where that's being utilized there, but I'm sure it's expensive and takes a lot of work, and our mayor doesn't want to know what happens to the creatures under the ground, but we need to, it could be a, problem, but would love to know what we can do forward and look for grant money to try to help us fix all that. And I do agree that a subdivision that has to put in a park, I wish they'd put it in first and then second, but I also know that they do what they do and they write their laws or their contracts the way they want to do it. And we all can't control that. So I think I've said enough. And like I said, if anyone wants to talk to me after, I'll be happy to talk to them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Gornick.
Yeah, I too would like to, along with my fellow council members, recognize the great service that our veterans have done for us. A couple of items. One, I hope we do have a follow-up on the study session that dealt with refuse. I thought that was a very good meeting, and there are still some issues that come out. It's kind of ironic, but and I know our attorney's going to get mad at me sometimes for doing all this stuff, but we just took a 2-hour course on ethics. We have to take a lot of different courses at the state, and interesting enough, one of the slides in there was, and I'm sure my fellow council members remember it, had to do with competitive bidding process in the public contracts and about the whole issue of transparency. And that's important because I can understand why we would sole source, but I'm not sure the public understands why we would sole source something. And that needs to be explained if we're going to do that. And if it isn't, people fill in the blanks. People decide, well, the fix is in. Okay. The fix isn't in, it's just a sole source. But that's the reason why we have these contracts that we open up and do an RFP for everything. So the other thing is, I'd sure wish the city planner or somebody from his office was here to hear some of the comments made by our citizens. I'd like to get a follow-up report on the over $3 million we've spent on IT to work out our internet activities and for our citizens and for our administrative services for the city. And I really can't wait to get a 4-day work week report, Nathan, and see how much money we've spent or how much money we've saved on this 4-day work week. Looking forward to that presentation. And other than that, that's it.
Real quick, about the 4-day work week, are we going to get that in the 6-month period, or do you think we'll get one a little bit sooner?
Well, we were using is that a trial period? So we can go back and compare same timeframes of next year, but we can probably put some preliminary data together. But, we're somewhere in our first guesstimates were somewhere in the $40,000 to $60,000 savings range.
For how much?
For annually for that one building between air conditioning.
Does that take into consideration all the solar panels we have over the parking lots?
Yeah, that they're producing power and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll all be included because that turns our meters backwards. So it just depends what we pay PG&E versus what we don't pay PG&E. Okay. Yeah, we have a 3 megawatt system. Yeah. Citywide.
Right.
Anything else, Mr. Gornick? Does that cover it? Was that it?
Yep.
Thank you,
Just check.
I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. I too want to echo the sentiments of our council and wish everybody a safe and happy Veterans Day. And I hope everybody does come out to the Veterans Parade to see all the work that they put into it and enjoy that and to honor our veterans. We are a military town, and I think we should show up in droves for something like that. So hope to see everybody out there. I do want to make a comment on Heritage Park. If you've been out there recently, there is some improvements to the ground issues recently. So that's all I'll say about that. But save the squirrels. That's all I'm going to say. I attended the ICSC conference with Nathan and the planning department. I think it was a good conference. So hopefully some good things come out of that. Also attended last week a wastewater meeting with a little bit of an update on where we're at with our wastewater treatment currently, which was very informative. I also attended the Rotary Crab Feed, which was very well attended. Lots of crab. So if you like crab, you should go. I personally do not like crab, but they do have what is it? Tri-tip. Very fun evening. You get to meet other people in the community. It was good to see some of our PD representatives out there and spouses. That was nice to see that you all were taking part in that. I continue to have constituent meetings, and they've been very good and very productive. There's a state water board meeting tomorrow at the Hanford Civic Auditorium. It is from 6 to 8:30, I believe. So anybody interested in seeing where we are with the trouble that we're in basically with our water in the South Fork King GSA and surrounding areas, go ahead and go get your information there. There is going to be a Lemoore Volunteer Fire Department and Lemoore PD volleyball tournament. I believe that is this Friday. Is that correct? So I won't say who I'm rooting for, but probably both of them.
Where's that?
I believe, has that been solidified? I believe it was Liberty, but
The last I heard.
okay. Watch their social media. It'll be out there if anything changes, but the last information was Liberty Gymnasium. That is November 10th. And then they will also have their annual blood drive, Battle of the Badges on November 14th. I don't believe, did you mention that? I'm not sure. Okay. So please give blood if you're able to. There's going to be a city county coordinating meeting coming up on November 14th, which is next week. Hopefully all of you guys can make it, and look forward to getting together with other cities and the county and seeing what's going on in our surrounding area. There's going to be an open house for Senator Hurtado's office on November 9th. They recently moved their office to Lemoore from Hanford. So they're doing a open house right downtown on D Street. So please look out for that. Also want to thank staff and the residents. Thank you, staff, for all the work that you do. And I want to thank the residents for coming and making your voices heard. It does make a difference and it does matter. So I just want you guys to know that. And I think that is all of my notes. So, but I do want to make record that Councilmember Orth took longer than me today. So I just want that in the record. So with that, we will go ahead and adjourn.